a recording of the public part of the meeting will be available on the council website within 24 hours. This is the first occasion remote participants officers will be joining the meeting. Would remote participants please use their hands up icon in Teams to indicate they have a question? Please turn your camera and microphone on when addressing the committee and off when you're not speaking. In-person attendees are required to wear masks on entry to the building and meeting room, but may remove them once seated. Would members and officers please remember to switch their microphones on when speaking and off when they have finished? And would people please switch off their mobile phones and put them on silent mode? Right. Apologies for absence.
None, Chair.
Have we got any?
None.
No, Chair, I have a question on that. I appear to have sent my apologies and attended that meeting. I think it was apologies. I don't recall attending that meeting. I don't think I finished work till about 6:20 that night.
Disclosure of interests.
None that I'm aware of, Chair.
Thank you. Section 106, Local Government Finance Act 1992.
None, Chair.
Urgent business.
None.
References from committees and other bodies.
None, Chair.
Chair's announcements. None. So item 8, finance update. We welcome Deb.
Right. Good evening, councillors, and thank you, Chair. So what I was going to say here is most of the finance update was reported as part of the executive. There is the Q2 report which is going to executive. So at this stage, our forecast is being finalized. So there's nothing much to add at this stage. And when we get the executive report out, then we will give you a full update on that, Chair.
Are we doing item 9 separately or wrapping it all into one?
That's okay. I do item 9, Chair.
So do you want to begin, Dev?
Yeah, I'll do item 9.
Okay.
Okay, so the Treasury Management Report, that's went to the executive, and just we are bringing back to FRG, and this is the year end 31st of March. So this is the outturn. If I refer you to the main report, which is on page your page 11 of 47. So I don't know what is in your report. I've got it in the agenda as page 11 of 47. So basically paragraph 4 describes where we are in terms of the capital expenditure. So the total capital expenditure was 190 compared to an outturn of 141. So there's a sort of profiling of some of the budget, and main areas are financing of major subsidiary projects, temporary accommodation purchase, and commercial properties. Most of these have been reprofiled in 21-22. The other point to note here, Chair, is the council, we did a application for capitalization stabilization of 60 million, and we drawn down on those 60 million during 2021. But as you are aware, we are going to require in 2021 roughly 14 to 15 million. So we won't be utilizing all the 60 million, and we are in the process of monitoring this year's 21-22 outturn. So the whole amount which we applied for, we won't be drawing down the full capitalization, which was in the region of 49 million. Other point which I would like to make here, and just following from the comments made at executive by Councillor Frank, is the interest rate risk of going up. And we've seen after the budget, the gilt went down, but interest rate, probably the Bank of England will revise the rate upward. So during 2021, we had 184 million of short-term borrowing, and we anticipated that there will be a rise in the interest rate. So for the last 6 months, we have locked most of the short-term. So most of our borrowing now has been fixed. And I have to say, is most of the borrowing which we fixed are at or slightly below the rate which we anticipated as part of our 21-22 budget. So the risk of an interest rate going up, we've managed to secure. So the rate was a bit up in the April, but when it started to come down around July, August, September time, that's what we fixed. Now we've fixed it at a right time, and now the tendency is for the rate to go up now. So those are the things. Now the report on page 13 is a detailed report. As I said, Chair, it went to executive. So I'm quite happy to go through those detailed ratios, but what I've just described is the main two area. But you will see on recommendation which went to executive is that the council, we are not in breach of any prudential limit. So the way the Treasury work is at the full council, the council approve and set some boundaries and some limit for the officers to operate. And during 2021, officers operated within those boundaries. So we're not in breach of any of those prudential limits. So I'm quite happy to take any question, item 9.
Yeah, I'm going to try very hard to stick to the rules because this is a report on Treasury management, and this isn't the place for offering opinions or advice on whether the council should be borrowing or not. This is more a report about where it's borrowing from and what it's using it for. But I do need some clarification, because the total debt, according to the grid in paragraph 14, is £609 million. The total debt, according to the grid in paragraph 16, is £451 million. The total debt, according to page 23, is £611 million. Well, first of all, they can't all be right. There's got to be an explanation for why the various figures, which I'm sure Deb can give us. But the other thing that obviously raises a query is whether these can in fact be the true total debt of the council, given that the council has borrowed £500 million to loan to the airport alone. So I think some additional explanation of that would be very helpful, please.
Yeah, okay. So I will try to pick up first the 609 figure, which you've mentioned was in. I'm just trying to click to that. So 609. Yeah, so the total debt 609,650. This is actual 2021. And then you're saying actual 5451. Okay. Yeah. So I see the gross borrowing. When you look at the gross borrowing, Councillor Frank, it's total including HRA. So if I can just look at, without going into much detail, the total debt of 609, and the paragraph below, it talks about the general fund debt. So that's probably the explanation. And the general fund debt is just general fund, and HRA will be in the region of 100 million plus. So that's probably will be my first explanation, but I will go into detail. Now, in terms of paragraph 16, when you say so that's, so the gross borrowing compared to his capital financing requirement, my understanding from this table is include the HRA debt. So I can go for the more detail, but I would say that would be the first explanation. In terms of your next, the total debt, you're absolutely right. Now, when we're talking about 2021, that is the actual. So actual debt and what is the borrowing, you will see from some of the table, the total borrowing requirement and the CFR. The CFR is how much. So if you look at table 14, so the one you've mentioned about the total debt 609, but the CFR is based on how much we've included in our capital program. So straight away you will see at the end of 2021, the total amount which we should have borrowed to fund all our commitment as part of the capital program was in the region of 778 million. But actually we borrowed just 609, and that's a point I've mentioned earlier, because we were doing quite a lot of internal borrowing because the cash flow was good at that time. That's the reason why we didn't borrow the full amount. But the point you made, yes, the total borrowing is more than the actual borrowing, and this year we'll draw down on those borrowing and long-term borrowing, and our total debt will be closer to that ceiling of the CFR. There's always, as I've mentioned last time, there's always what we do internal borrowing rather than borrowing and keeping money in the bank. If you've got cash flow in the region of 100 million is our internal borrowing. So that's the difference between the figure you've mentioned and why our borrowing is lower than the total amount which is permitted under the prudential code than what approved by the council. Now, the question you've asked is, yes, with the exposure is in the region of 500 million, but that includes all our borrowing. And if you look at our CFR at end of 2021 is 780. And if you look at if 21-22 figures were here as part of the budget, that CFR would look closer to, I think if I recall, I will have to check those figures, but it's in the closer of 900 million. So that's half 500 million of the LAL borrowing is part of that closer to the 900 million, which is at the maximum we'll borrow once all the debentures are advanced to LAL, but that includes Vauxhall Homa as well. And if all the projects are completed on time, and if there's no project which is profiled further, then that 500 million will be part of that, the region of 900 million of total borrowing requirement. So I think that answers your question, or is there anything I miss? I'm quite happy to elaborate further.
Well, no, actually, it doesn't really answer the question, does it? Because the figure in the top grid under paragraph 14 of 609.6 is very close to the figure, the total figure you're giving us of 610 on page 23. And the 610 is stated as including HRA.
Yeah.
And the figure in the top grid is talking about only the total debt. I mean, the fact that it's what is it, 1 million? Yes, it's 1 million different. So, you know, what's 1 million between friends?
Yeah. So you're right.
So that are we to assume? You see, I'm really confused, because if we're to assume that the HRA should be something like the difference between the 450 and the 609, which it isn't, because that's not what it says on page 23, and the general fund debt at 450 isn't enough to cover the 500 million that's been borrowed to loan to the airport. Now, let's try a different angle then. Is this, when you say total debt, is that total of external borrowing? Does it not include internal borrowing from reserves?
Okay. So I missed one of the points here. So you're absolutely right. So when we've said the actual 451 million, yeah, you're right. The total exposure to the loan to LAL is 500,000. This actual is for the year. So what I'm saying here is 366, an estimated 588, and then there's a further 451. But the total CFR, which the amount up to the level which we could have borrowed, is nearly 800 million. So although we gave LAL an additional amount as debenture, we didn't borrow. We were funding part of that through our internal borrowing of 168. And that internal borrowing is to not to borrow when we've got cash flow. So the total, if you see what is the total borrowing, is 778. So that's the total amount which we are allowed to borrow, but how much we've borrowed is 609. So that's what I'm saying here is the 168, once we start borrowing and wind down our internal borrowing, then that 168 will be reflected in the total debt, which is the general fund 450. So if you say what is the total maximum borrowing allowed by the council as part of the Treasury management strategy for 21-22 was 778. And that will include the 500 million. And the 500 million, that's not the total debt for the airport by end of 2021, but that's include this current year as well. So it's at what particular point in time we're looking at this, and at that point, how much we've borrowed against what is the total ceiling. So I can give you a much detailed full answer, Councillor Frank, and I will just draw down the in-year figure, the year-to-date figure, and what has been drawn down, how much internal borrowing we've used, and the actual debt. So I can give you. You will see the even in paragraph 16, the operational boundary which was approved by the council is in the region of 800 million. So this is the maximum which we are allowed to borrow. But obviously, if we can use our internal cash flow, then we don't borrow to the maximum. If we go above that maximum, then I have to report to the council and to the executive that we've reached that maximum. So I can give you a much more detailed answer and picking up all these figures and explain you how at any particular point in time how the figures figures are calculated. I can do that if that's okay with you, Councillor Frank.
Yeah, I do understand the difference between the capital financing requirements and the borrowing, and I do understand where most of that difference lies.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, can we just have a straightforward yes or no? Mm-hmm. In which of these figures, the 609, the 610, or the 450, do any of those figures include the 168 internal borrowing?
So the 608 million doesn't include the 168 internal borrowing, and that's the difference between the maximum, which is in paragraph 14 the table. So the maximum which we are allowed to borrow based on our capital program and our commitment to LAL is 778. How much we've borrowed at end of 2021 actual was 609. So which this means that the under borrowing is 168. So the 168 is between how much we actually borrowed and how much we use our internal cash flow, because we do generate cash flow. And last year there was quite an upside on the cash flow because government allowed lots of COVID and business rate very much upfront. Some of the COVID grant government paid even in March. So we had a big cash flow which government allowed for council, and some of the business rate they paid on installment, but there has been a big chunk of those paid back even in March 2021 for 21-22. So that's why we had a lot of cash into the system, and that's why we underborrowed by 168. So answer to your question, 609 less CFO, which is the maximum which you're allowed to borrow, and we underborrowed by 168.
Yeah, I can see all that, and please believe me, I'm not criticising the process of internal borrowing. It makes perfect sense when you've got cash sitting there rather than borrowing it at commercial rates. But of course, it only makes sense so long as the government isn't going to stick a limit on the amount that you can borrow from the Public Works Loans Board. Because if they do, then you can come unstuck very quickly. But of course, nobody knows if it hasn't happened in the recent past, and I don't think anyone is expecting it to happen now, but it could. And all I was really trying to get at is what is the true level, and it's looking to me as though the true level of external debt, including housing revenue account and general fund, is something in the region of £610 million. And at some stage, that may need to go up if some of the money that's been borrowed from reserves actually needs to be used for the purposes for which they were put into the reserve accounts. Provided it doesn't need to be used for those purposes, then the total external debt will remain at around £610 million. Am I somewhere near right there?
That's absolutely spot on. So you're absolutely right. Actually 609, or the figure 610, I'll have to just check that. The maximum we are allowed to borrow approved by the council is 778. And once we start to wind down that internal borrowing, it will go to 778. And coming back to your point about PWLB, you're absolutely right. Government has come with some consultation to look at how government can try to put some sort of, I would say control, but some sort of oversight on the amount council of borrowing. But I have to say all our capital program, which has been included as per the council report, what we do at the beginning of the year, we apply to PWLB, the DMO, and we submit our capital strategy, and those capital strategy get approved to say whether we are entitled to borrow. So I'm glad to inform members that the total figure which you are saying about 778, that's the figure which has been approved by the DMO, HM Treasury. Basically, they will look at our capital strategy and our application, and then they have approved. So the point I've made earlier, Councillor Frank, is during the last 6 months, we have been borrowing from PWLB because we feel that the interest rate is going up. So we managed to lock most of our short-term borrowing into long-term, and we've got those approved and released by PWLB. So in principle, the borrowing for this year, and in principle for the borrowing for next year, which has been included as part of our council budget report and treasury management strategy, has been agreed by HM Treasury and PWLB. But there's always a risk that government can bring other guidance, and SIPFA are looking at the prudential code right now, so there might be. But I think my view will be it will be unlikely that the investment which we have incurred and it's part of our capital program will fall part of those guidance where they might tighten the rules. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see.
Any questions or queries or comments? Alan.
Thanks, Chair. Back on page 11, where the estimated general fund capital expenditure was just over 190 million, and the actual outturn is just shy of 142. So we're about 50 million, 48 million difference. Is that, and I know it says we are going, that expenditure has been moved into 21-22. How much of that 60 million loan is covered by that difference between what was estimated and what actually was the outturn on the capital expenditure?
Okay, so the difference between those two figures are the financing of major subsidiary projects. So TAPS was one of those areas. I have to look at the detailed analysis to give you a breakdown. I'm just trying to go down just to see whether I think there's a breakdown somewhere of the amount which was reprofiled. Just trying to find that. Just bear with me, Councillor. So that's overall borrowing need. Just cost borrowing. So there was a breakdown on the executive report which says how much of the expenditure was reprofiled. So yeah, I think paragraph 6 on page 14 says the majority of capital expenditure which did not incur 21 relating to finance of major subsidiaries. Yeah, but it doesn't say exactly how much. So I think I'll have to come back on that, Councillor. I thought it was on the report, but clearly they didn't put a breakdown. Now, the point which you've made is how much of this is part of the 60 million loan. That 60 million loan which was approved, that was part of the emergency budget. So as part of the emergency budget, there was a breakdown of that 60 million. And I would say by now, quite as and when those projects are progressing, like the DOT project and DCO, those loans would have been disbursed. So it's part of the, you will see that 60 million was based on part of the capital program, and some of them were to fund some of the LAL reserves which they've used part of the capital program. So I can come back on that on in much more detail. How much of that 60 million was already released by March 2021? My guess will be most have been released out of the 60 million.
Okay, thank you. I've just got one other sort of more of a point, but a question on in paragraph 16, where we see the general fund table with the authorised limit. How much higher can the council put that limit before it becomes unmanageable?
Okay, that's I'm just making a note here. So yeah, how much is a very, very good question. I think if you look at the prudential code, and that's the bit which government and SIPFA and councils are trying to come to some sort of guidance how best council can use that prudential code, but at the same time doesn't put too much debt on the balance sheet. There is no clear guidance to say £1 billion or 1.5 billion or half a billion. It all depends on your projects and whether the projects are fully financed and what are the likelihood for you to service that debt. So the prudential code based on whether it's prudent, whether it's affordable, whether your general fund can afford it, but that's sustainable. So it's not just for 1 year, it's sustainable over the 3-4 years. And that's why we put MRP repayment and we provide for debt servicing. So the answer to your question here is that figure, which is 778, with the 21-22 budget, will reach potential probably, if my memory serves me right, in the region of 900 million. At this stage, unless we come up with other projects which will require any borrowing, those will be assessed on a case-by-case basis. So if you say there is 1 billion the maximum, or it's 1.2 billion the maximum, it depends on a case-by-case basis. So I'll give you a simple example, Councillor. We have been successful in securing 20 million for levelling up fund. That was not as part of the medium-term financial plan because there was no point of committing that figure until unless we've got the Chancellor has announced. But that project in itself is a 100 million plus project. And that project is for regeneration housing, which is allowed as per the Prudential Code, and it's also allowed as per the central government guidance and HM Treasury guidance. So what we are going to do, you will see when the Q2 report will come out, that mid-year, there will be an additional requirement for the council to approve another 100 million, which is the less the grant, it will be in the region of 80-90 million. So the question here is, from now, there'll be another potentially give or take 100 million of borrowing in order to finance those housing projects, which the government has allowed up to 20 million. So that's what I'm saying is if there's a sound project, there's a sound business case, the Prudential Code gives you the authority to go and borrow as long as you've got a sound business case and you can service that debt. So that's the answer to your question here is it depends on a case-by-case basis. And that's we always look at it and we always prepare the treasury management strategy and we bring to the council to show all the risks, all the affordability prudential indicators and for the council to approve it. So that would be probably my best and honest answer to you, Councillor.
Okay, thank you.
We all learnt about how debt can have many different figures. At this stage, I would just like to say that we, I get the right piece of paper. Item 9, to note, recommendation is to note the report and consider any tasks for the group arising from the Treasury management activity. Is that fine to go through?
I'd be happy to vote for noting it, but I can't see the point in putting anything else in.
Okay, thank you. And then the one we've just been discussing, to approve for submission to full council and audit committee, the annual report of the Treasury Management and Prudential Indicators for the year ending the 31st of March 2021, which summarises and reviews the Council's Treasury management activities for 2021 financial year. 2, note there has been an increase in the amount of external borrowing 84 million during 2021, which is financing council approved projects. Item and section 3, note that the council did not breach any of its prudential limits. Are we fine with those recommendations?
Yep.
Recommendations from the executive.
Oh, gets confusing, doesn't it?
I think, again, Chair, to be fair, we can't do anything but note.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
That is, unless anyone wants to send some sort of recommendation to the executive. At this stage, I don't.
No. Right, item 10 on my sheet, debt collection.
Okay. So, thank you, Chair. Just looking at the report I have in front of me here. Okay, so this is a report which we promised last time will bring debt. Why this is important is because of the pandemic, because of all the sort of arrangement which government brought some measures quite rightly to make sure we stop collecting debt, especially some of the tenants. So now we are coming out of the pandemic, and now we've got court are opening. So magistrate court, all courts are taking sort of summons and which we're sending. So that is quite important to see how we can try to start to recover the debt, and at the same time to support those vulnerable people and residents who are struggling to make payments. So absolutely the council will take those on board when they're making the arrangement of payments. But debt has increased during the COVID because it was not sort of easy to collect or to chase some of those debts. So what you've got in front of you on page 27, members, is, if I refer you to paragraph 3, it says the debt balance was 67.4, a decrease of 2.8. So that is the debt position for September from major debt areas. But if you look at the movement, which is on table 4, you will see that compared to the opening debt, the debt in terms of the areas like council tax, business rates has gone down because we are collecting more. But there are 2 areas which I would like to explain and comment a bit further, is housing rent and temporary accommodation. So I'm quite happy to go on the other areas, but that overall is an area where I will take you through. We've set up a user group and trying to share best practices and to make sure we collect what is due, but at the same time is support whenever support is required. So if I can take you to paragraph 10, Chair, on page 28, it says here the housing rent at the end of September, the collection rate was 99.8 and the target was 101, because it's not just in-year debt, it's debt from prior years as well. So that's why you will see sometimes it's more than what we are collecting. But there's a dip usually experienced over summer. The service report that the collection will improve in the second half. So I think officers are quite sort of working towards making sure that we recover in the remaining 5 months, so that at least we can recover some of the dip in the debt collection. So that's one of the reasons. Temporary accommodation debt is always a challenge and it's quite a big area. And the current debt was sort of 1.2 of 9.9 million, which was shown above the table. Now, this level, there was a sort of transfer which we do between benefits, so it was 0.3 million, but still the level of debt is high. And you will see that there are 7,297 cases, which is former tenants, which is tenants are no longer in those properties. So this is an area which we are working towards. There are areas where, as part of the debt in temporary accommodation, there is a sort of detailed data cleansing exercise as well, because temporary accommodation debt is quite a challenge because not all debt is due. Some of debt we get through housing benefit. So it's quite a tricky debt to get to the bottom of it. But this is an area where the user group, which I'm going to take you later as part of some paragraph below, is trying to concentrate how we are going to make sure that we start to collect those debt, and those debt where rich debts can make payment. So before I take any question, I will just like to point out paragraph 15, Chair. So we set up, just 1 sec, please. Sorry, I took a sip of water. So we set up a debt user group, mainly what you call champions within each department, those parking, in council tax, business rates, and try to share best practice. So what we are learning from each other and the group as well. And that's why you will see we are getting regular reports now. And then we'll have to start to put target on those groups, which the next meeting will sharing those. And then we'll have regular report to FRG and to CLMT, and we'll be including those as part of the executive report as well. And the proposal for the group is debt management practice. It varies across the council because some debt are not that difficult to collect, but some debt can be difficult to collect. So as discussed last time, Chair, we are going to put a turnaround plan, and we're already trying to turn around those debt and starting to work with department to say how from finance and CLMTs are aware as well, how we can support to make sure we collect the debt when they are due. Because any delay in debt collection sometimes make it more difficult to collect. So that would be my overall summary, Chair, and I'm quite happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions, David?
Yeah. Can I just concentrate for a moment on the data in paragraph 4, and in particular the 36 million of council tax? So I guess the first question is that I presume that figure is net of any money that the council would not be collecting because of the council tax reduction scheme, yeah?
Yes, because they get the exemption, so they don't get billed for that. Yeah.
Yep, thanks very much. And the next thing I think we need to know then is it I mean, it presumably includes the historical debt that the council hasn't written off and still expects to be able to collect in one way or another. But does it also include the whole of the council tax that the council has levied for the year 21-22, or only the first 6 months, which is what we're looking at for the collection figures?
So the write-off, as you said, yeah, is exclude the write-off. The opening debit is the whole amount. So which means that at beginning of April, that the amount which was outstanding. So in terms of the closing debt of the 6th September, the 33 million is what is outstanding. So the point you're making here is whether it's for the full year. Yes, it is for the full year. It's not just for 6 months, because for 6 months by now we should have collected nearly 44-45% of a net debit of, I think the net debit for council tax in the region of 65 million. So by now we should have collected 45% of that. So it's just for the whole year, but 6 months is already collected.
Yeah, fine, I understand that. So part of the collection is the current year's council tax, obviously. Part of it is collecting older debt. How come then, instead of collecting 45% of the current year's plus a bit of arrears from previous years, you've only collected 3.3 million.
I think this one I'll have to go and yeah, so the 3.3 million is opening of 36 million, closing debt of 36 million. So I may have to go back and check that, Councillor Frank, because it says here, council tax collection arrears 2 point, the collection mid-year target is 57 and council tax impacted recovery of COVID, yeah. So I think what it says the 3 million is what has happened to the position. So basically it's just showing a position statement between the 36 million and the 33 million. So what this is showing is how much we've raised and how much we've collected. So it's just showing the difference. But the point you're making absolutely right. Between that collection is the additional net debit which we've built and how much we've collected. So yeah, in the next table, we can break it down further, is how much additional which we've raised and how much additional is collected. So we'll add a few more columns because the collection one is just showing a net figure. Yeah.
No, the 3.3 million and the 33 million can't be right. That simply isn't, even Luton Council isn't so incompetent that it only collects what, 7 or 8% of its council tax.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
you would expect that collection figure to be something like 14, 15 million or thereabouts, and the closing debt to be correspondingly smaller.
Yeah. So I think what you've got here is the collection is just more tracking the collection based on the opening debit, but in between there has been more debit raised for 6 months and those have been collected. So you're right. The actual collection in cash terms is more than that. That's why I was saying is I will add a column here to say how much is the in-year council tax bill raised and collected. So you're right. This is just tracking from the opening one, but is a net figure here, which is not showing the additional net debit raised in terms of council tax and the amount collected. So yeah, I will break it down further just to show that figure for the in-year, i.e. 21-22. And you're right, is we've collected, maybe the collection is maybe for the 6 months. I think last time I looked at it was around 40-45%. So we've collected quite a lot, but this is showing that just a net difference.
So the figure in the closing debt column should be quite a lot smaller. I mean, are you going to send us an email to explain all this? Because the figures don't work. It can't be right.
Yeah, now I will give you the breakdown, detailed breakdown. So these are all year figure and in-year figure. I will give you the breakdown of both figures. I'm just making a note of that. And then I'll give a breakdown how much you've collected from prior year and how much you've collected from in-year figure. And the performance report which you produce shows the 6 months collection in terms of cash. But going forward, I'll produce both tables, the whole year, the prior year, and the in-year, so that this is clearer. Yeah, we did that, Councillor Frank.
Thank you.
Well, we're asked to take note of the report and make any recommendations. That I think probably the word clarity comes in there, arising from the collection performance for the first half of the financial year. It's so as poor lay people can actually understand what's coming into the being said.
Yeah, I mean, you might want to note it and thank Dev for agreeing to email us with some clarification on the collection figures.
Yeah, I think that's agreed by all. We do appreciate the amount of work you've got to do, and sometimes figures come up which we find it very difficult to comprehend sometimes. But your explanations normally even do tend to show us the way forward. And again, thank you very much for
We'll do that, Chair.
item 10. All right. Now the next item is item 11, monitoring and outturn lessons learned, key risks.
So thanks, Chair. So this is a report based on the outturn. So the outturn 2021, when we produced the period 11, we tried to forecast what the figure is going to be for the year. And at that time, when we produced a figure, and then when the outturn came out for 2021, there was few areas where those figures were significantly higher. And that's this report is going to look at those 3 areas where waste disposal was one of them, and then BTS is another one of them, and the employee savings target. So I will take you through all the 3 areas and say what are the lessons learned and what we are applying as part of the 6 months figures in order to get the forecast more accurate. So first, in terms of waste management and disposal, the final cost was $500,000 above the forecast figure. Now, in terms of waste management, we just put a bit of more detailed context. What were the reason about the overall overspend on waste? And the several factors were, if you look at page 31, paragraph 9, there was an increase in residual waste because people started to work from home and there was more waste created and the recycling rate as well was down. And there was at the same time, bullet point 4 is say the international recycling markets operate on an international scale and demand for export for materials has fallen due to the pandemic. And on top of that, there is a requirement to have a much more high quality type of recycling so that they can generate a more higher price. What is more important for members is paragraph 10. So what we have done based on the lessons learned, and last year, i.e. 2021, even part of this year has been a challenge because of the pandemic. There are a lot of ways of people working from home, people's habit of shopping, parking. There has been a lot of changes, and we're trying to learn how best we can track those costs and what are the cost drivers which give us how it's happening. Parking is a typical one, is people's habits have changed. So paragraph 10 says what we're doing is regular and increased analysis of waste levels. So we're doing it quite on a monthly basis and try to forecast how this will influence the future pattern and how it will impact on the financial. So, and at the same time, we're doing quarterly estimate of the year-end reconciliation. So previously, because it was quite stable, the year-end reconciliation were not throwing significant variances. But right now, because the situation is quite fluid, it's good to say if the trend carries on, what will happen to the year-end reconciliation? Because the year-end reconciliation based on the contract will have to take the total amount and the forecast throughout the year. So now we are trying to do some sort of scenario is what will happen to the year-end. Year-end is based adjusting on the contract figures. So hopefully when we'll present the quarter 2, you will see hopefully we'll have a much better focus on waste. BTS another area because there has been quite guidance coming from central government during the pandemic, and there was something which you call PPN, is public procurement notice, what can be charged to contractors, what can't be charged. So BTS at the same time, the year 2021 was quite a volatile year, is we were in lockdown and then coming out lockdown, whether our BTS can start to provide services. So it was quite a year which was very much up and down. So forecasting the level of income and forecasting legally from the public procurement notice what BTS can charge to HRA, even some of the areas when the work was not done. And that was a challenge. So right now what we're doing is going back to paragraph 12. It says we are doing analysis of work completed. So what we're trying to do is to look at the order book and say, but what the order book looks like. So if the order books is getting direction of travel is getting full, then we can say we can generate those income. But right now we're trying to focus what the next 6 months order book is going to look like. So here as well, you will see when the report will come out on Q2, we are trying to get as close as at best we can focus on BTS. And then that's the report says we'll have more visibility in the works pipeline, because that's what it gives us what is going to happen. Then in terms of employee savings target, we did as part of the emergency budget and before we had sort of set employee targets, and those employee targets were being met between deletion of vacant posts, staff leaving under voluntary separation scheme, and wider transformation of service. Now we did start as part of the emergency budget a voluntary separation scheme, but there was some guidance coming from central government about the cap in terms of the settlement, and then it was put on hold, and then there was further clarification. So there was some we had to put those voluntary separation scheme on stop, and then it started. I think on March time, government says no, they are not going to apply the cap, but I think now back government guidance is they will be looking at applying those cap. So there as well, it was difficult to predict. So we had contingency of 540, but even after the 540 applying contingency, there was still a 540 shortfall, which was reported. So those are the three main areas which we have to monitor much more closely, and just to make sure that we don't have any sort of significant variance when it comes to the year end. But hopefully this year might be more stable, and there might be sort of focus will be much sort of a bit easier. So on that chair, I think paragraph 18 says further work has also been undertaken to identify areas of greatest risk. So what we're trying to do as well is, because we've got limited resources, we are working with department and to say where the areas where we regard as volatile, where the areas we regard as high risk based on our experience and based on what COVID has we've experienced through COVID, and try to focus the finance resources on those volatile and high risk areas, which may have a bit like the 80-20 rule, is 20% of the budget cost centers may have 80% of the biggest impact on the variances. So that's what we are trying to do, a bit more intelligent and risk-based in order to be more effective in our monitoring and forecasting. So with those comments, Chair, I'm quite happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Dev, for that very comprehensive report. And David?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to crave your indulgence here, because I would like to move something for the record, and once we've agreed or not agreed that, I'd like to ask a question. Are you going to allow me to do it that way round?
That's okay. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, the basis on which I want to actually move something is because I believe that forecasting anything in the period in question was an impossible task. And the fact that the key officers actually managed to get a final result that was only £1.7 million adrift of their forecast in the circumstances is pretty remarkable, because of the situation that they were facing. So what I'd like to formally move is that we place on record our thanks to the officers involved for managing to keep the final outturn figure so close to their final monitoring forecast, given the circumstances in which everybody was working during the pandemic.
I think it's unanimous.
Seconded by the rest of the committee, I will check.
Okay, so let's have the question.
Right, well, the reason I wanted to do it that way round was because, to be quite honest, the question isn't one that Deb's going to be able to answer. So I think we're going to be reliant on Democratic Services to extract an answer from Sean Askins or some member of his team somewhere in that area. What I think we need to understand, I'm looking at third bullet point down in paragraph 9 on page 31. And what I think we need here is the number, how many tonnes of garden waste were collected between March 20, it's a 9-month period they do this collection, they don't do it in the winter. So how much garden waste was collected between March 2020 and November 2020? How much garden waste was collected between March 21 and November 21? And how much residual waste was collected for both of those periods? I think this is, I mean, I don't want to take up the group's time with yet another report, but if we could just have the figures, if someone could email them to the members, I think that would be quite enough. We don't need any more than that. I don't want another 10-page report.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, we'll get Sean Askins or someone from his team to respond to those questions via email.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea because I know on the garden waste they had to actually start employing more people because their estimates weren't as expected. Any other questions or queries? Yes, Alan.
In terms of potential future risks, has any thought been put to what might come out of was it COPA 26 with regard to air travel and what they might agree or not as to any limitations and what impact that may have on the airport's recovery?
Okay, so first, Chair, can I thank Councillor Frank for his kind words? So it's very much appreciated, and I will take this back to the team and the officers. So thanks very much, Councillor Frank. Coming back to Councillor, your question is, as a result of, I would say, COVID, there are risks. Risks in terms of parking, in terms of all things which have been keeping track of. But coming back to your main question, whether COP26, what impact it will have on air travel, that we'll have to wait and see, because what will be negotiated eventually will have an impact across every industry, including aviation. In terms of the recovery, the latest figures is showing that the airport is recovering quickly, so air passengers are recovering quickly, and we hope that the number of passengers which we've put in the forecast of the stabilization plan, we hope that that forecast will reach by end of March. So that's what the latest figures are showing. In terms of whether COP26 will have any impact on the future recovery of the airport and overall any airport, not just Luton, I think I will try to go back and get a much full answer from Lal, because that's a bit yeah, I have a general, but I don't have the specific knowledge about aviation industry. So if you can bear with us, I make a note of that, and then I will get a full response from Lal.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Well, we're asked to consider the measures being undertaken and propose any further measures identified by FRG to improve the ongoing review of the council's finances, which we have to a certain degree done with waste management. Right. Works programme.
Chair. So members can see the work programme in front of them and future dates of meetings. So is there anything that anyone would like to add?
Is the one dated the 25th of November, is that the new agreed one that I had with Matt, or is it slightly outdated?
Yes, Chair, that would be outdated. That hasn't been updated after that meeting that you had.
So can we have an update of what actually is happening on the 25th, please?
Yes, Chair.
Right. Yes, Chair. Removed from the 25th of November, the rent deposit scheme is now going to go to the January meeting, or the second January meeting, as the same as the property investment performance. The budget update and the preliminary budget update are going to be combined into one report. So they're the main changes to the work programme for the next meeting at the end of the month.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we all agreed that's a sensible way to work out what looks like a very full meeting, and some of the items are very important, so we really need time to be able to discuss them, if need be, with greater detail. Right, I think that brings us to the end of. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, thank you for slimming down the 25th of November agenda. I mean, a couple of things on there, like setting the council tax base, it is in fact only going to take us a few minutes because it's given to us for information. It's not something we can influence or make any recommendations on. But there's one thing that I think we should now insist must come to the next meeting. We have been asking and asking and asking for a report on the missing £1.2 million of SEMLEP money. Not only has it not arrived, it has not appeared, it's not even listed on the future work programme. I think the time has come for us to say quite clearly, we want it, and we want it on the next meeting.
So I can't hear you at all.
I think, Dev, we had a discussion about this. I think Dev's got a verbal update on this.
Yeah.
I would prefer a written update. Because
Can I just I can send a report in the next meeting. That will be okay. I think where we are on this is that the investigation is still ongoing, and that's what we have been both SEMLEP and ourselves and with BASE have agreed to have a joint statement. So at this stage is because that investigation is ongoing, and it's, as you are aware, NATIS has been involved. So we haven't got any further update where it's substantial enough to brief the members. But I will put it in a formal report, and that is the update we have been giving to the SEMLEP board as well. So the SEMLEP board, BASE and ourselves has agreed that we will have a joint statement and update as and when we are briefing the respective stakeholders. So yes, I'm quite happy, Chair. We can include in the next, and I'll bring a report, but just to at this point is nothing more which we know, which you could have updated the members, which was the case 6 months or 9 months ago. So if there's anything which come to light, based as part of the investigation, of course, we'll bring it to members. But officially, if Councillor Frank would like, quite rightly, a report to put it in writing, so that at least as officers we can update members what progress has been made since the last time we've discussed. So quite happy to do that. But that is a verbal update, is where we are. Is that investigation is ongoing, and there's not much further we can add at this stage.
Thank you. Could I suggest one other item that could go on the work programme, not necessarily for the next meeting, but I think we need a report, not from a council officer, but from Ernst & Young, the council's external auditors, on the progress that they are making in signing off the council's accounts, which I believe are group accounts, for the years 2018-19, 2019-20, and 2020-21. And I think a member of Ernst & Young should be invited to come to the meeting to present the report.
What do members think? I think it's just to, it was a piece of information for me. They haven't been signed off yet, is that right?
Sure.
In that case, we definitely need somebody from Ernst & Young to come along and explain to us why it's taking so long.
I think we've got a fair idea of why, because they made a report to Audit and Governance Committee a couple of months ago. So I think we understand why. What we really need to understand is what progress is being made in resolving the issues so that they can sign them off.
Okay.
Can I, Chair?
Yeah, Derek, if you've got any comments.
Yeah. So just to brief, and yes, we will bring a report, and in fact, we'll be bringing a report to the Audit Committee as well. So if you look at the Audit Committee agenda, even the last agenda, there has been a comments and briefing from Ernst & Young. So those regular report goes to the Audit Committee as well. So briefing on progress and everything goes to Audit Committee. So we can bring a report to FRG, but those will be the report which we have to brief Audit Committee. So the next Audit Committee will be the next briefing from Ernst & Young. And where we are on the 1819 and 1920 is mainly the bulk of the work is being done. So Ernst & Young or their staff are going through LAL working papers from PricewaterhouseCoopers as well. So as we speak, those is being done. Most of the issues have been addressed. They are going through their process of completing the audit. One of the things which we know is they do struggle with capacity, which Neil has informed me. But myself and the two partners from Ernst & Young and the chief exec, we meet regularly. So coming back to Councillor Frank, the point which they've raised, significant progress have been made. And the other thing which is important here is the review carried out by CIPFA. And as members are aware, as part of the MHCLG Capitalization Directive, CIPFA carried out a detailed review, and those reports we're expecting those reports to be published maybe in the next couple of weeks. So that's our hope is. And that piece of work is absolutely an important piece of work which auditors will have to consider. So those are the few things which are holding us back. The aim is, and that was our aim when we discussed at the last audit committee, is to complete everything and to aim for end of November. So that was, if we look at the minutes of the audit committee, that was the undertaking given by Ernst & Young as well. So, and EY did give an update on the progress. So what I can do, Chair, just to make sure FRG are updated on the statement of accounts and the audit, I will brief FRG every time, and then I will circulate that audit report, which was discussed in the last meeting probably 4 or 6 weeks ago. So I'll do that, and then regularly I will bring an update on where we are on the audit, if that helps FRG members.
David?
Well, yes, it does, but I want to hear from the horse's mouth. I want to hear from Ernst & Young what progress is being made, not from anybody else.
Yeah, that's fine. I will ask the partner of Ernst & Young to attend. But in the last audit committee, I think it's webcast as well. So the audit committee is recorded. I think Ernst & Young partner was there. He officially, personally briefed the audit committee. So I think if Matt, probably the recording is on our website, I will look at that recording and you will hear from the partner himself, Neil, talking about where we are in the progress. But I will quite rightly ask him to attend the next meeting, but he will do that for the next audit committee anyway. He normally attends. So quite happy to ask him to come and explain at FRG as well. Yeah, no problem. We'll do that.
Thank you very much, Deb. Any happy? Well, right. Local Government Act 72, Part 5A. We go into private session, if that